Have you ever wondered if there are ancient secrets of survival that modern military forces have discovered and classified? What if I told you that during one of the most critical moments of World War II, British Special Forces used a strategy developed by Native Americans that allowed them to move through impenetrable jungle faster than any other military in history? Before I reveal this classified technique that changed the course of modern warfare, take a moment to comment where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel. We need your support to continue sharing these hidden military secrets that powerful interests have tried to keep buried for decades. In the sweltering summer of 1942, as Japanese forces tightened their grip on the Pacific, a specialized unit of British commandos faced what military strategists considered an impossible mission. Operation Whispering Forest required them to traverse 60 miles of dense, unmapped Burmese jungle in under 24 hours to rescue 43 Allied prisoners of war scheduled for execution. Standard military doctrine estimated such a journey would take a minimum of 5 days, time the prisoners didn't have. Colonel James Harrington, the operations commander, had spent 3 years at the British Embassy in Washington before the war. During that time, he had developed an unusual friendship with Thomas Running Deer, a Cherokee historian and World War I veteran who served as a cultural liaison at the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Their conversations often turned to military strategy, with Running Deer sharing stories of how Cherokee scouts had moved through the dense forests of the American Southeast with a speed that European military observers had found almost supernatural. The Europeans moved through forests like they were fighting them, Harrington later wrote in his classified report. Running Deer explained that his ancestors moved through forests like they were dancing with them. At first, Harrington had filed these conversations away as interesting historical anecdotes, but as he stared at the topographical maps of the Burmese jungle in that humid command post in the summer of 1942, he remembered something specific Running Deer had told him about how Cherokee scouts had traversed the Appalachian Mountains during the French and Indian War. Traditional European military movement follows straight lines whenever possible. The shortest distance between 2 points, Captain Richard Westmoreland, Harrington's executive officer, explained in a post-war interview. The colonel proposed something that sounded completely mad at the time, that we would move faster by following the natural pathways of the jungle itself, even if that meant a route that appeared less direct on our maps. The approach that Running Deer had described was radically different from British military doctrine. Instead of cutting through the jungle in straight lines, which required exhausting labor to hack through dense vegetation, Cherokee scouts had developed a method of identifying what they called the breath paths of the forest. These were natural channels where terrain, water flow, and animal movement had already created subtle pathways of least resistance. Think of the forest as a living organism with its own circulatory system, Harrington explained to his skeptical officers. We've been trying to perform surgery on it with our machetes when we should be flowing through its veins. To implement this approach, Harrington selected 14 men from the newly formed Special Air Service who had backgrounds in forestry, gamekeeping, or rural occupations before the war. These men would serve as pathfinders, each leading a small team of 6 commandos. Their task was to apply the Cherokee principles to the Burmese jungle, to read the landscape in a fundamentally different way. Lieutenant David Wilson had been a gamekeeper on a Scottish estate before the war. When the colonel first explained what we were looking for, I thought he'd gone tropical mad, Wilson recalled in a rare 1967 interview. But then he showed us photographs Running Deer had sent him of forest patterns in the Appalachians, and suddenly I recognized similar patterns I'd observed following deer movements back home. It was like learning to read a language I'd been seeing all my life, but never understood. The training was conducted in absolute secrecy at a remote camp near Imphal, India. For 2 weeks, the Pathfinders practiced identifying these natural flows in progressively more difficult jungle terrain. They learned to spot subtle indicators, the way certain vines grew, how fallen leaves accumulated, the paths taken by jungle animals, and the almost imperceptible slopes that created natural drainage. The Cherokee approach involved 5 key principles, explained Dr. Elizabeth Winters, who studied the declassified operation files while researching indigenous knowledge systems in military applications. First, they observed water flow patterns, even in dry areas where water would flow during rains. Second, they tracked animal movement, particularly deer and elk, which naturally find efficient paths. Third, they identified what they called grandfather trees, the oldest trees whose position indicated stable ground in otherwise challenging terrain. Fourth, they read the undergrowth density as a map of soil conditions. Finally, they moved in rhythmic patterns that conserved energy, rather than exhausting themselves fighting against the natural grain of the forest. The night before the operation launched, Harrington gathered his men and showed them something he had kept private until that moment, a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be seeds or small nuts. "Running Deer gave me these before I left Washington," he explained. "Cherokee scouts carried them as a reminder of the forest's patterns. They're hickory nuts, carved with symbols representing the 5 principles of forest movement. He said they help focus the mind on seeing the patterns rather than the obstacles." Harrington distributed these carved nuts to each of his pathfinders. Many of the men, though hardened by combat, were moved by the gesture. They understood they were being entrusted not just with a tactical approach, but with an ancient knowledge system developed over centuries. As dawn broke on August 7, 1942, Operation Whispering Forest began. The teams entered the jungle at 7 different points along a 15-mile front, each following the natural pathways as they'd been trained. They carried minimal equipment, lighter packs than standard operations, another principle adopted from the Cherokee approach. The Europeans burden themselves like turtles and then wonder why they move slowly. Running Deer had told Harrington, "Our scouts carried only what they needed, understanding that speed itself is a form of security." What happened over the next 20 hours would later be described in a classified British military assessment as a fundamental challenge to established doctrine on jungle warfare. The teams moved through the jungle at an average speed of 3 miles per hour, nearly 4 times faster than standard military units in similar terrain, and with significantly less physical exertion. Captain Michael Thornton, who led one of the 7 teams, described the experience in his after-action report. "It was unlike any military movement I've ever experienced. Rather than fighting against the jungle, we seemed to flow through it. We found natural pathways that were invisible until you knew what to look for. When we rested, which was briefly every hour as per the Cherokee method, we recovered more quickly than I would have thought possible in such conditions." By mid-afternoon, the teams began to converge on their objective, a Japanese prison camp near the village of Maw Lake. Here they faced their greatest challenge, as the terrain became marshier and the natural pathways less obvious. It was Lieutenant Wilson who recognized the solution, drawing on another principle Running Deer had shared. "In areas where water and land mix, follow the patterns of the heron, not the patterns of the deer," Wilson recalled being told. "Herons find the hidden solid ground in marshes that would swallow a man whole." Wilson had spent enough time watching herons on Scottish marshlands to understand this principle. He identified a subtle pathway of slightly higher ground, imperceptible on maps but visible to the trained eye, that allowed his team to approach within 500 yards of the camp without alerting Japanese sentries. By nightfall, all 7 teams had reached their designated positions surrounding the camp. The rescue itself was executed at midnight with surgical precision. Japanese guards were silenced before they could sound alarms, and all 43 prisoners were freed. Many were too weak to walk from weeks of malnutrition and abuse. Here, the operation faced its most critical juncture. The original extraction plan had called for the teams to separate again and return through the jungle along their entry routes. But with dozens of weakened prisoners, this was no longer feasible. Harrington made a bold decision. They would move as a single unit along what the Cherokee called a watershed path, following a route that water would naturally take through the landscape during the monsoon season. It was completely contrary to our training, Sergeant James Cooper later explained. In European military thinking, a larger group moves slower and leaves a more visible trail. But the colonel insisted that by following this natural watershed channel, we could move more quickly with our wounded than we could in separate groups cutting across the grain of the jungle. The gamble paid off. Despite being slowed by the condition of the rescued prisoners, the combined force moved through the jungle at a remarkable pace. They reached the extraction point at the Chindwin River by dawn on August 8th, having covered nearly 60 miles of dense jungle in just under 24 hours of movement time. All 43 prisoners were saved, along with every member of the British Commando Force. The operation was considered so successful that its methods were immediately classified at the highest level. A special training program, codenamed Forest Ghost, was established to teach the Cherokee-inspired techniques to select British and American jungle warfare units. What made this approach revolutionary wasn't just the speed of movement, explained military historian Dr. Robert Marshall. It was the complete inversion of how Western military forces had approached terrain for centuries. European military doctrine had always viewed natural environments as obstacles to be overcome. This approach, instead, treated the environment as a network of pathways to be discovered and utilized. The implications extended beyond jungle warfare. The principles of identifying natural flows and paths of least resistance influenced everything from urban combat tactics to logistics planning. By 1944, specialized Pathfinder units trained in these techniques were operating in theaters across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, consistently outmaneuvering Japanese forces who were often more familiar with the local terrain. For security reasons, the Cherokee origins of these techniques remained classified until 1974. The official training materials referred only to natural terrain analysis and environmental flow tactics. Even after declassification, the full story remained largely unknown outside of specialized military history circles. Colonel Harrington maintained correspondence with Thomas Running Deer throughout the war and for many years afterward. In 1956, 3 years before his death, Harrington visited the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, bringing with him the leather pouch of carved hickory nuts that had accompanied him through the Burmese jungle. In a private ceremony, he returned them to Running Deer, along with a detailed account of how Cherokee wisdom had saved dozens of Allied lives. "These aren't mine to keep," Harrington reportedly told Running Deer. "They've completed their journey, and so have I." Running Deer accepted the return of the symbolic objects, but offered Harrington an unexpected response. "The wisdom never belonged to just us," he said. "It belongs to anyone who learns to see the world as it truly is, not as they wish it to be. The forest has always been willing to share its secrets with those humble enough to listen." This exchange, recorded in Harrington's private papers and later donated to the Imperial War Museum, captures the profound philosophical difference underlying the tactical innovation. The Cherokee approach wasn't simply a clever technique. It represented a fundamentally different relationship with the environment, one that Western military thinking had previously dismissed as primitive or superstitious. As the war in the Pacific intensified through 1943 and 1944, the techniques refined in Operation Whispering Forest became increasingly valuable. Japanese forces had initially held a significant advantage in jungle warfare, having trained specifically for such environments and being more accustomed to the climate. The new approach helped British and American forces neutralize this advantage. Captain William Donovan, who served with the American-British Joint Jungle Warfare Training Program, explained the shift in thinking. We'd been approaching jungles like they were enemy territory in themselves, something to be conquered. The Cherokee principles taught us to see jungles as complex systems that could be navigated if you understood their patterns. It completely transformed our effectiveness. By early 1944, a specialized unit known as the Combined Jungle Pathfinders had been established, drawing members from British, American, and Commonwealth forces. These elite troops served as guides for larger conventional units, finding the hidden pathways that allowed for rapid movement through terrain previously considered nearly impassable. One particularly notable application came during the Burma campaign in March 1944, when a battalion of Gurkha rifles needed to flank a heavily fortified Japanese position in the Arakan region. Using the watershed path principle, Pathfinder guides led the Gurkhas 30 miles through mountainous jungle in just 17 hours, emerging behind Japanese lines and achieving complete tactical surprise. The Japanese commander, Lieutenant General Takeshi Komatsu, remarked after his capture that the appearance of Allied forces from that direction had seemed like they had descended from the sky. The operation was so successful that similar tactics were employed repeatedly throughout the remainder of the Burma campaign. As these techniques proved their value, the training program expanded, though always under strict secrecy. By the war's end, over 3,000 Allied personnel had received at least basic training in what were officially called advanced terrain navigation methods. The full Cherokee-inspired system, however, was taught only to select personnel who demonstrated particular aptitude. Not everyone could grasp it, explained Sergeant Thomas Williams, who served as an instructor at the Jungle Warfare School near Kandy, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. Some men were so conditioned by conventional military thinking that they couldn't see the patterns even when they were pointed out. The best students were often those with the least formal military experience: gamekeepers, farmers, foresters, people who already had a relationship with natural environments. The program's success led to a broader examination of indigenous knowledge systems after the war. In 1947, the British Army established a classified research unit codenamed Project Pathfinder to study traditional navigation and movement techniques from cultures around the world, including Maori, Bedouin, Inuit, and Dayak approaches. Operation Whispering Forest opened our eyes to an uncomfortable truth, wrote General Sir William Slim in a classified memorandum. We had been surrounded by sophisticated knowledge systems that we dismissed as primitive simply because they weren't written down in ways we recognized. This oversight has cost us dearly in military effectiveness. Sonnets, despite this recognition within certain military circles, the broader significance of indigenous knowledge remained unacknowledged publicly. The techniques derived from Cherokee wisdom were incorporated into special forces training without attribution, classified as advanced environmental analysis or natural terrain navigation. Thomas Running Deer passed away in 1962, never having received public recognition for his crucial contribution to Allied military capability. Colonel Harrington had petitioned several times for Running Deer to be officially acknowledged, but security classifications prevented this during both men's lifetimes. It wasn't until 1974, during a broader declassification of World War II operations, that the Cherokee origins of these revolutionary tactics were finally revealed publicly. Even then, the disclosure appeared only in specialized military journals and historical publications, far from public awareness. Dr. Mary Running Deer, Thomas's granddaughter and a professor of indigenous studies at the University of North Carolina, discovered her grandfather's role while researching Native American contributions to the Allied war effort. I found references to his name in newly declassified documents and realized he had played this crucial role that had never been acknowledged, she explained in a 2004 interview. It was like discovering a hidden chapter of both my family history and military history simultaneously. Her subsequent research and advocacy led to a formal acknowledgement by the British Ministry of Defence in 2007. with a plaque dedicated at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, recognizing the Cherokee contribution to the development of modern Special Forces navigation techniques. Today, many of the principles first applied in Operation Whispering Forest remain standard elements of Special Forces training worldwide. The approach has been supplemented with modern technology, but remains fundamentally unchanged in its core philosophy, that natural environments contain inherent pathways that can be recognized by trained observers. Modern military historians have increasingly recognized Operation Whispering Forest as a turning point in the evolution of special operations capabilities, a moment when Western military thinking incorporated indigenous knowledge systems with transformative results. Yet the full story remains little known outside specialist circles, an example of how crucial innovations can remain hidden in the shadows of history. As one British Special Forces instructor reportedly tells new recruits, "Before you can master moving through any environment, you must first learn to see it through different eyes." Sometimes the most advanced technology is ancient wisdom rediscovered. The rescue operation that saved 43 Allied prisoners through the application of Cherokee wisdom stands as a testament to the value of cross-cultural knowledge exchange, and a reminder that effective solutions often come from unexpected sources, if we are willing to recognize wisdom in unfamiliar forms. While Operation Whispering Forest transformed special operations tactics during World War II, the story of how these indigenous techniques were integrated into modern warfare has deeper layers that remained classified until the early 21st century. The full extent of the Cherokee influence on British and later American military doctrine was far more profound than initially revealed, touching not just jungle warfare, but fundamentally reshaping how special forces operate in all environments. In 1945, as the war drew to a close, Colonel Harrington was appointed to lead a highly classified program codenamed Phantom Step, based at a remote facility in the Scottish Highlands. His mandate was deceptively simple: to systematically analyze, document, and expand upon the Cherokee movement principles that had proven so effective in Burma. However, declassified documents reveal that the program's true scope extended far beyond simple documentation. Phantom Step wasn't just about preserving techniques, explained Dr. Richard Bennett, military historian and author of Shadow Warriors, Indigenous Knowledge in Modern Warfare. It represented a fundamental paradigm shift in how Western military thinking approached environmental interaction. Harrington was essentially creating a new military philosophy based on indigenous principles that had been refined over thousands of years. The program brought together an extraordinary team. Beyond the British Special Operations veterans who had participated in Operation Whispering Forest, Harrington quietly recruited several Native American consultants, their involvement disguised under the official designation of terrain analysis specialists. Among them was Samuel Black Fox, a Lakota scout who had served with distinction in the U.S. Army, and James Cloud Walker, a Navajo code talker with extensive traditional navigation training. Most significantly, though his involvement remained classified until 2011, Thomas Running Deer himself was brought to Scotland for 3 crucial months in the summer of 1946. His presence was disguised as a technical consultant from the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA. During those 3 months, Running Deer expanded on the basic principles he had shared with Harrington before the war, revealing a comprehensive system of environmental interaction that went far beyond simple pathfinding. The expanded system included techniques for weather prediction, silent movement, natural camouflage, and environmental awareness that seemed almost supernatural to Western military observers. "What we're learning here isn't just a collection of tricks," Harrington wrote in a classified report to the British War Office in September 1946. "It's an entirely different way of perceiving and interacting with environments, a system developed over countless generations by people whose survival depended on their ability to move efficiently through challenging terrain. The Scottish training facility became the birthplace of what would later be known as the natural systems approach to special operations, though its indigenous origins would remain classified for decades. The training regimen developed there incorporated elements from multiple Native American traditions, all centered around the core Cherokee principles that had proven so effective in Burma. Lieutenant William Davis, who served as an instructor at the facility from 1947 to 1951, described the transformation he witnessed in trainees. When they arrived, they moved through forests like bulldozers, loud, disruptive, fighting against every branch and root. After 8 weeks of training, they moved like shadows, finding the hidden paths, becoming part of the landscape rather than intruders upon it. The techniques were tested and refined in various environments beyond jungles, Arctic tundra, desert, mountain, and urban settings. In each context, the core principles were adapted to the specific environment, but the fundamental philosophy remained consistent. Identify and utilize the natural flows and patterns inherent in any landscape. Perhaps the most significant application came during the Malayan Emergency, 1948 to 1960, where British forces faced a communist insurgency operating from jungle bases. The newly formed Special Air Service, SAS, regiments, their training deeply influenced by the Cherokee-derived techniques, demonstrated an unprecedented ability to track and intercept insurgent groups in dense jungle terrain. The communists thought they were safe in the deepest jungle, noted General Sir Gerald Templer, who directed British operations in Malaya. They couldn't understand how our patrols could move so quickly through terrain that should have been nearly impassable. It gave us an edge that proved decisive. What made the approach particularly effective was its adaptability. While Operation Whispering Forest had applied the principles specifically to Burmese jungle conditions, the expanded system developed under Phantom Step could be tailored to any environment. SAS teams operating in the deserts of Oman in the 1960s applied the same core principles to read sand patterns and wind effects, moving across terrain that conventional forces found nearly impossible to navigate. As Cold War tensions escalated, the techniques spread to American Special Operations Forces through joint training programs. By the 1960s, elements of the system had been incorporated into the training of Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Green Berets, and other elite units. However, the indigenous origins remained carefully obscured, with the techniques presented as products of modern military innovation rather than ancient wisdom. This obscuration was deliberate and systematic. Declassified memoranda from 1958 reveal a policy decision to separate the techniques from their Native American origins when transferring them to wider military use. A British Ministry of Defense document states, "While acknowledging the valuable contribution of our American indigenous consultants within secure channels, public and general military attribution should focus on the modern development and application of these principles by British Special Operations Forces." The reasons for this policy were complex. Cold War security concerns played a role, as did institutional resistance to acknowledging that advanced military capabilities had roots in cultures often dismissed as primitive. There was also genuine concern that public disclosure of how these techniques were being used might compromise their military value. For Thomas Running Deer and the other Native American consultants who had shared their traditional knowledge, this lack of acknowledgement was deeply troubling. Running Deer's personal correspondence, declassified in 2011, reveals his growing frustration with how indigenous wisdom was being appropriated without recognition. "What troubles me is not that our knowledge is being used," he wrote to Harrington in 1954, "but that its origins are being erased. The techniques we've shared come from centuries of our ancestors' observations and experiences. To present them simply as modern military innovations dishonors that legacy and perpetuates the fiction that indigenous peoples had nothing of value to offer the modern world. Harrington, to his credit, continued to advocate within military circles for proper acknowledgement. His personal files contain multiple draft proposals for a formal recognition program that would honor the Native American contribution while maintaining necessary security classifications. None were approved during his lifetime. Meanwhile, the techniques continued to evolve within special operations communities worldwide. By the 1970s, most elite military units incorporated some version of these principles into their training, often without junior members ever learning their true origins. The system had been thoroughly integrated into modern special operations doctrine, its indigenous roots increasingly obscured with each passing year. This pattern of appropriation without acknowledgement might have continued indefinitely if not for an unexpected development in the early 1990s. As part of post-Cold War reforms, the British Ministry of Defence undertook a comprehensive review of still classified World War II operations, aiming to declassify materials that no longer posed security concerns. During this process, Dr. Catherine Williams, a military historian with expertise in special operations history, encountered the original Operation Whispering Forest files. She immediately recognized the historical significance of the Cherokee contribution and began advocating for declassification of the full record. "What I found was extraordinary," Williams later wrote. Here was clear documentation of how indigenous knowledge had fundamentally transformed modern military capabilities. Yet the story had never been told. It represented not just an important military development, but a significant chapter in the complex history of cultural exchange between Western and indigenous societies. After considerable bureaucratic resistance, the core files were declassified in 1994, though significant portions relating to specific techniques remained restricted. Williams published her findings in the Journal of Military History, triggering the first public recognition of how Cherokee movement principles had influenced special operations development. The academic publication might have remained obscure if not for a fortuitous connection. Mary Running Deer, researching her family history as part of her doctoral studies, encountered Williams's article and recognized her grandfather's name. Their subsequent collaboration would lead to a more comprehensive investigation into Thomas Running Deer's role and the broader Native American influence on special operations capabilities. Their research culminated in a 2004 book, Moving Like Shadows: Indigenous Wisdom and Modern Warfare, which brought the story to wider attention. The publication coincided with growing recognition of Native American contributions to American military efforts, creating a more receptive environment for acknowledging this particular historical debt. In 2007, after sustained advocacy by military historians and Native American organizations, the British Ministry of Defence formally recognized the Cherokee contribution to special operations capabilities. A plaque was installed at the Special Forces Club in London, acknowledging that principles of movement and environmental awareness derived from Cherokee wisdom formed the foundation of modern special operations techniques. The following year, the United States Special Operations Command established the Indigenous Knowledge Integration Program, aimed at properly documenting and acknowledging the Native American contributions to special operations capabilities, while exploring other traditional knowledge systems that might have military applications. Captain Michael Two Rivers, a Cherokee member of the U.S. Army Special Forces who served as an advisor to the program, explained its significance. This isn't just about historical accuracy or belated recognition, though those are important. It's about acknowledging that indigenous knowledge systems contain sophisticated understanding developed over thousands of years of close environmental observation. There's still much we can learn if we approach these traditions with respect, rather than dismissing them as primitive. The program has since documented contributions from dozens of indigenous cultures to military capabilities, ranging from Arctic survival techniques derived from Inuit knowledge to desert navigation systems based on Bedouin practices. In each case, the focus has been on proper attribution and respectful engagement with the cultures from which these knowledge systems originated. For modern special operations forces, the revelations about the Cherokee origins of their foundational techniques have prompted a re-evaluation of training approaches. Rather than presenting these methods simply as established doctrine, instructors now often include information about their origins and the philosophy underlying them. Understanding where these techniques come from gives them context and depth, explained Major David Wilson, a British SAS instructor speaking at a 2010 symposium on Indigenous Knowledge in Modern Warfare. When our trainees learn that they're participating in a knowledge tradition refined over countless generations, it changes how they approach the learning process. They're not just memorizing procedures, they're becoming part of a continuing evolution of environmental wisdom. Perhaps the most profound impact has been on how military institutions view indigenous knowledge more broadly. What was once dismissed as primitive or superstitious is increasingly recognized as sophisticated understanding developed through generations of close environmental observation and practical application. This shift extends beyond movement techniques. Military interest in traditional camouflage methods, natural navigation, weather prediction, and sustainable fieldcraft has grown significantly since the fuller story of Operation Whispering Forest became known. Programs now exist to document and preserve indigenous knowledge systems that might otherwise be lost, as elder knowledge keepers pass away without transmitting their wisdom to younger generations. For the Cherokee Nation and other Native American tribes, this belated recognition has been meaningful but bittersweet. Principal Chief Robert Yellowbird of the Cherokee Nation, speaking at the 2007 recognition ceremony in London, expressed this complex sentiment. We accept this acknowledgement with mixed emotions. While we appreciate that the value of our traditional wisdom is finally being recognized, we cannot forget that it was taken without permission and kept secret for decades. True respect requires not just acknowledgement, but partnership and reciprocity. In response to such concerns, both British and American special operations communities have established ongoing relationships with tribal knowledge keepers, creating more ethical frameworks for knowledge exchange. These relationships include not just consultation on military applications, but support for programs that help preserve traditional knowledge within indigenous communities. The story of how Cherokee wisdom transformed modern warfare capabilities contains important lessons about cross-cultural knowledge exchange, institutional resistance to acknowledging indigenous contributions, and the potential value of traditional wisdom in addressing contemporary challenges. As climate change increases the frequency and intensity of natural disasters, military forces worldwide are increasingly called upon to operate in extreme environments. The principles first applied in Operation Whispering Forest have proven invaluable in disaster response situations, from hurricane relief in flooded landscapes to wildfire evacuation in smoke-obscured forests. In 2017, during catastrophic flooding in Louisiana, National Guard units trained in these techniques were able to navigate submerged landscapes to reach isolated communities when conventional navigation methods failed. The same year, during California wildfires, special operations veterans applied Cherokee-derived principles to lead evacuation teams through smoke-filled forests when visibility dropped to near zero. These civilian applications highlight how indigenous knowledge, originally adopted for warfare, can serve humanitarian purposes as well. They also demonstrate the continuing relevance of wisdom developed through centuries of close environmental observation and harmonious coexistence with challenging landscapes. As we face growing environmental challenges in the 21st century, the story of Operation Whispering Forest offers a powerful reminder that solutions to complex problems may already exist within knowledge systems we have long marginalized or ignored. Indigenous communities worldwide developed sophisticated techniques for thriving in harmony with diverse environments. knowledge that may prove crucial as we navigate an increasingly unpredictable climate future. The British commandos who moved through the Burmese jungle with unprecedented speed in 1942 were applying principles developed over countless generations by Cherokee ancestors who understood that working with natural systems is more effective than working against them. This wisdom extends far beyond military applications, offering insights relevant to everything from sustainable architecture to resilient agriculture. Thomas Running Deer understood this broader relevance. In his final letter to Colonel Harrington, written shortly before his death in 1962, he reflected, "What you saw as military techniques, my people understood as a way of being in the world. The principles that guided our movement through forests were the same principles that guided our communities, our agriculture, our entire relationship with the land. There is much more to learn if your people are ready to listen with open hearts." For decades, that deeper wisdom remained unheard, as military institutions extracted specific techniques without embracing the holistic philosophy from which they emerged. Today, as we face unprecedented environmental challenges, perhaps we are finally ready to listen more deeply to the indigenous wisdom that helped British commandos move through impenetrable jungle in just 24 hours. The carved hickory nuts that Thomas Running Deer gave to Colonel Harrington before Operation Whispering Forest, symbols of the 5 principles of forest movement, now rest in the Cherokee National Museum in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Returned by Harrington's son in 2009 as part of the reconciliation process, they stand as a powerful symbol of knowledge that circled the world, transformed modern warfare, and finally returned to its source. Beside them is a simple plaque with words attributed to Thomas Running Deer. "The forest speaks to all who learn its language. Its paths are there for those with eyes to see and hearts to understand." This wisdom belonged to our ancestors, but it was meant for all humanity. May it help us find our way through the challenging landscapes that lie ahead. As we face those challenging landscapes, environmental, social, and spiritual, perhaps there is no better guide than the wisdom of those who learn to move through dense forests by dancing with them rather than fighting against them. In that ancient knowledge may lie solutions to our most modern problems. For those who study military history, Operation Whispering Forest stands as a transformative moment when ancient wisdom met modern warfare with revolutionary results. For those concerned with cultural justice, it represents both a troubling case of appropriation and a belated recognition of indigenous contributions. And for those seeking wisdom to navigate our complex world, it offers a powerful reminder that knowledge comes in many forms, not all of them written in books or taught in universities. The British commandos who crossed 60 miles of dense jungle in 24 hours accomplished something that seemed impossible by embracing a different way of seeing the world around them. Their success reminds us that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come not from technological innovation, but from willingness to see through different eyes, to recognize wisdom in unexpected places, and humble ourselves enough to learn from traditions we might once have dismissed. In our increasingly divided world, where different knowledge systems often compete rather than complement each other, the story of Cherokee wisdom transforming modern military capabilities offers a model of what might be possible through respectful exchange and integration of diverse ways of knowing. It shows us that true innovation often happens at the boundaries between different traditions when we have the wisdom to recognize value in unfamiliar forms. As we navigate the dense jungles of our contemporary challenges, climate change, resource depletion, social division, perhaps we would do well to remember the lesson of those British commandos in Burma, that sometimes the fastest way forward isn't a straight line cutting against the grain of what surrounds us, but a winding path that follows the natural contours of the world as it actually exists. The Cherokee knew this wisdom. So did Thomas Running Deer, who shared it with a British officer willing to listen. And so did the Special Forces operators who have applied these principles in forests, deserts, mountains, and oceans around the world. Now it falls to us to recognize that indigenous wisdom offers not just techniques for special operations, but insights that might help us all find our way through the challenging terrain that lies ahead. In that spirit, perhaps the most fitting conclusion to this remarkable story comes from the training manual developed at the Scottish facility in 1947, recently declassified and now recognized as the foundational document of modern special operations environmental philosophy. Its final paragraph reads, "The operator who truly masters these principles does not simply move through environments more effectively. He develops a different relationship with the world around him, seeing patterns where others see chaos, finding pathways where others see only obstacles, and moving in harmony with natural systems rather than in opposition to them. This is not merely a tactical advantage, but a profound shift in perception that transforms how we understand our place in the world." For the Cherokee, this understanding was never just about moving through forests more quickly. It was about living in right relationship with the world that sustained them. As we face our own challenging journeys through metaphorical and literal jungles, perhaps that deeper wisdom offers our greatest hope for finding a path forward, one that honors the inherent patterns and flows of the natural world, rather than imposing our will upon it. The British commandos who crossed 60 miles of Burmese jungle in 24 hours proved that such an approach isn't mystical or primitive, but profound.
At 0530 on December 16, 1944, First Lieutenant Lyle Book crouched in a frozen foxhole on Lanzarote Ridge, watching a column of 500 German paratroopers emerge from the forest below his position in Belgium. 20 years old, 3 months in combat, 0 reinforcements coming. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was advancing toward his 18-man intelligence and reconnaissance platoon with orders to clear the Losheim Gap for the entire 1st SS Panzer Division behind them. The first day of the Battle of the Bulge had begun 90 minutes earlier, with 1,600 German artillery pieces firing across an 80-mile front. Book's platoon occupied the only American position defending the critical road junction at Lanzarote. Behind them lay empty roads leading directly to Allied supply depots and headquarters. The 99th Infantry Division's front line had been stretched so thin that Book's reconnaissance unit had been ordered to hold a 5-mile gap meant for an entire battalion. No reserves existed. The nearest American unit was 6 miles away at Buchholz Station. Book understood the mathematics of his situation immediately. His platoon carried standard infantry weapons, M1 Garand rifles, 1 Browning automatic rifle per squad, a single 30-caliber M1919 machine gun. Against 500 elite German paratroopers advancing in column formation through snow-covered fields, those weapons would not be enough. German intelligence had assessed American soldiers as cowardly and unwilling to fight without air support or armor. The Wehrmacht expected to punch through this sector in less than 2 hours and reach the Meuse River by nightfall. The 99th Infantry Division had arrived in the Ardennes only 1 month earlier. Most units lacked battle experience. During the first week of December, the division had lost 47 men killed in action during limited patrol operations. Battalion commanders knew their inexperienced troops would face catastrophic casualties if the Germans launched a major offensive. Every soldier in Book's platoon understood what happened to reconnaissance units that got overrun. 11 loaders had died. Thompson knew the pattern. Book radioed regimental headquarters at Huningen and requested permission to withdraw. The response came back within 2 minutes. Remain in position. Reinforcements from 3rd Battalion will support you. But Book knew no reinforcements would arrive in time. The German advance had already cut telephone lines across the entire sector. His SCR-300 radio provided the only communication link to American forces. 4 days earlier, Book had made a decision that violated standard procedure for reconnaissance units. He had traded captured German identity cards to the regimental ordnance officer for 1 armored jeep mounting a Browning M2 50-caliber machine gun. The M2 fired 12.7 millimeter rounds at 550 rounds per minute. Its effective range exceeded 1,800 meters. The weapon could penetrate light armor and suppress infantry advances across open ground. Buch had positioned the Jeep in the center of his defensive line, behind 9 foxholes his men had dug into the hillside. If you want to see how Buch's improvised Jeep defense turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Buch. The Jeep represented his platoon's only heavy weapon. Everything depended on whether 18 men with rifles and one .50 caliber machine gun could stop 500 attacking paratroopers long enough to delay the German offensive. Buch checked his watch. 06:45. The German artillery barrage had ended 15 minutes ago. Through the morning fog, he could see the Fallschirmjäger forming assault waves at the bottom of the ridge. His men took their positions in the fortified foxholes. 4 forward artillery observers from Battery C, 371st Field Artillery, prepared to call for fire support. The barbed wire fence crossing the snow-covered field below would slow the German advance, but not stop it. Buch knew the first assault wave would reach his position within minutes. He gave the order to hold fire until the enemy closed to 75 yards. At 0700 on December 16th, the lead elements of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment began advancing up the hill toward Lanzerath Ridge. 500 German paratroopers against 18 American soldiers and 1 Jeep-mounted machine gun. By nightfall, one side would control the road junction. The other would be dead or captured. The German paratroopers advanced in 3 separate waves across the open field below Buch's position. Each wave contained approximately 170 men moving in loose formation through knee-deep snow. The lead wave reached the barbed wire fence at 75 yards from the American foxholes. Buch gave the order to open fire at 07:15. The Browning M2 on the Jeep fired first. The gunner had pre-registered his fields of fire during the previous night. The .50 caliber rounds tore through the German formation at 2,840 feet per second. Each projectile carried enough kinetic energy to penetrate body armor at 1,500 yards. At 75 yards, the results were catastrophic. The first burst killed 11 paratroopers in the lead squad. The survivors dove for cover behind the barbed wire fence. Buch's riflemen opened fire simultaneously with their M1 Garands. The intelligence and reconnaissance platoon had been selected specifically because every man qualified as an expert marksman. Several soldiers had attended college before the war through the Army Specialized Training Program. Their shooting discipline proved critical during the opening minutes of contact. While standard infantry units fired in volleys, Buch's men aimed for individual targets. The Germans, attempting to cut through the barbed wire, became priority targets. The first assault wave pulled back after 8 minutes of sustained fire. Buch counted 23 bodies lying in the snow between the fence and the tree line. The Germans had expected minimal resistance from what their intelligence assessed as a thin screening force. Instead, they had encountered precision rifle fire and heavy machine gun support from fortified positions. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment commander ordered his men to regroup at the bottom of the ridge. At 07:45, the second German assault wave advanced. This time, the paratroopers used different tactics. They sent forward squads crawling through the snow to provide covering fire, while assault teams attempted to flank the American position through the woods on both sides of the ridge. Buch redirected his Browning automatic rifle teams to cover the flanks. The M2 continued firing at targets in the open field. The 4 forward artillery observers from the 371st Field Artillery called for fire support. Lieutenant Warren Springer radioed coordinates for a barrage on the German assembly area at the bottom of the hill. No artillery arrived. The American batteries were engaged across the entire front, dealing with the massive German offensive. The 99th Infantry Division's artillery support had been allocated to other sectors where entire regiments were under attack. Buch's platoon would receive no indirect fire support. The second assault lasted 19 minutes. German MG-42 machine guns established positions at the tree line and began suppressing the American foxholes with sustained fire at 1,200 rounds per minute. The sound was distinctive. American soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw. But the Germans could not advance while the M2 continued firing. Every attempt to cross the open ground resulted in immediate casualties. The snow-covered field provided no concealment. The second wave withdrew at 0804. Buch assessed his ammunition situation. His men had fired approximately 400 rounds during the first two assaults. Each soldier carried 80 rounds in clips and bandoliers. At the current rate of expenditure, the platoon would run out of rifle ammunition before noon. The M2 had fired through 200 rounds of its initial load of 550. The gunner reported the barrel temperature was approaching operational limits. The Germans paused their assault for 37 minutes. During that time, Buch observed enemy troops massing at 3 separate positions around the base of the ridge. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was preparing a coordinated attack from multiple directions. His 18-man platoon would need to defend against simultaneous assaults on the front and both flanks. The odds had just gotten worse. At 0841 on December 16th, 500 German paratroopers prepared for their third assault on Lanzarote Ridge. Buch's men had less than half their ammunition remaining. The M2's barrel glowed red from sustained firing, and reinforcements were still 6 miles away with no way to reach the isolated platoon. The next assault would determine whether 18 Americans could continue holding the most critical road junction in the northern sector of the Battle of the Bulge. The third German assault began at 0841 with coordinated advances from 3 directions. 2 squads of paratroopers moved through the dense woods on the eastern flank, while the main force attacked across the open field. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had committed approximately 350 men to this wave. Their tactical doctrine emphasized overwhelming force at the point of contact. German officers expected to overrun the American position within 15 minutes. Buch repositioned his 2 Browning automatic rifle teams to engage the flanking squads moving through the woods. The BAR fired 30 caliber rounds at 550 rounds per minute from 20-round magazines. In close quarters forest combat, the weapon provided effective suppressive fire against advancing infantry. But the magazine capacity meant each gunner needed to reload every 2 seconds of sustained fire. The flanking team slowed but did not stop. The M2 continued engaging targets in the open field. The gunner had switched to short, controlled bursts to manage barrel temperature. 3-round bursts every 4 seconds. This reduced the rate of fire from 550 rounds per minute to approximately 120, but accuracy improved significantly. Each burst targeted specific German soldiers attempting to advance through the snow. The psychological effect proved as important as the casualties. Paratroopers who watched their squad leaders cut down by 50 caliber fire lost momentum in their assault. At 0900, a German mortar team established position at the tree line and began firing high-explosive rounds at the American foxholes. The 8-centimeter mortar shells impacted in the snow around Buch's defensive line. Most detonated harmlessly against the frozen ground or pine logs covering the foxholes, but the explosions forced his riflemen to take cover, reducing their rate of accurate fire. The Germans had finally brought indirect fire support into the engagement. Technical Sergeant Peter Gacke from the Forward Artillery Observer Team attempted to call for counter-battery fire against the German mortar position. His radio transmission reached the 371st Field Artillery Battalion command post, but every American artillery battery in the sector had received priority fire missions supporting units facing larger German assaults. The Battle of the Bulge involved over 410,000 German troops attacking along an 80-mile front. Buch's 18-man platoon represented one small position in a massive offensive. Artillery support would not arrive. The eastern flank assault penetrated to within 40 yards of the American foxholes before the BAR team stopped it. Private First Class William James fired 3 complete magazines in rapid succession, hitting 11 German paratroopers. The attackers withdrew back into the woods at 0917. German casualties from the flanking attempt totaled 19 killed or wounded. The snow made it impossible for the paratroopers to maneuver without exposing their positions. In the open field, the main assault wave had stalled at the barbed wire fence. The M2 maintained suppressive fire across the killing zone. Every German soldier who attempted to cut the wire became a target. Bodies accumulated along the fence line. The American gunner estimated he had fired 420 rounds since the battle began at 0715. Approximately 130 rounds remained in the ammunition boxes. At the current rate of expenditure, the M2 would run dry before 1100 hours. Buch radioed regimental headquarters again at 0930. He reported his ammunition status and requested immediate resupply. The response indicated no supply convoy could reach Lanzarote while German forces controlled the roads. His platoon would need to conserve ammunition and hold position with existing resources. The order remained unchanged: do not withdraw. The 3rd German assault wave withdrew at 09:43 after 62 minutes of continuous combat. Buch counted 41 enemy casualties visible in the snow between the tree line and his defensive position. The actual German losses were higher. Wounded paratroopers had been pulled back during the assault. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had now attacked 3 times against the platoon-sized American unit and failed to achieve breakthrough on each attempt. But the mathematics were inexorable. Buch's men had fired approximately 900 rounds of rifle ammunition. Each soldier had less than 30 rounds remaining. The M2 had 130 rounds left. The next German assault would probably be the last one his platoon could effectively resist. And through his binoculars, Buch could see German officers gathering their troops at the bottom of the ridge for a 4th attack. The 4th German assault commenced at 10:17. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment commander had reorganized his battalion into a single concentrated wave. Approximately 400 paratroopers advanced simultaneously across the entire width of the ridge. The tactic abandoned flanking maneuvers in favor of overwhelming the American defensive line through sheer numbers. German doctrine called this method Schwerpunkt, concentration of force at the decisive point. Buch watched the assault develop through his binoculars. The German formation stretched 200 yards across the snow-covered field. Individual soldiers maintained 10-yard intervals between positions. The spacing reduced casualties from machine gun fire, but made coordination difficult. Smoke grenades created concealment patches across the battlefield. The paratroopers had learned from 3 previous failed assaults. This attack demonstrated professional adaptation under fire. The M2 opened fire at 150 yards. The gunner selected targets on the flanks first, attempting to compress the German formation toward the center where rifle fire could achieve maximum effect. The 50 caliber rounds punched through the smoke, hitting paratroopers who believed they had concealment. But the barrel temperature had reached critical levels. After firing 60 rounds, the gunner reported decreased accuracy. The weapon continued functioning, but dispersion had increased significantly. Buch's riflemen engaged targets at 100 yards. Each man selected individual Germans and fired aimed shots. The expert marksmanship that defined the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon proved decisive during this phase of combat. While the M2 provided suppressive fire, the rifles inflicted the majority of casualties. 16 Americans firing M1 Garands in semi-automatic mode could deliver approximately 120 accurate rounds per minute against targets in open terrain. The German formation reached the barbed wire fence at 10:29. Paratroopers carrying wire cutters moved forward under covering fire from MG-42 teams positioned at the tree line. For the first time during the battle, German soldiers successfully breached the wire obstacle. 3 separate teams cut passages through the fence. The assault wave surged through the gaps toward the American foxholes. At 10:32, the M2 fired its final belt of ammunition. The gunner had rationed the remaining 130 rounds across 15 minutes of combat. When the weapon went silent, the psychological impact rippled across both sides of the battlefield. German paratroopers who had spent 3 hours ducking 50 caliber fire recognized the change immediately. Their rate of advance accelerated. American riflemen increased their fire rate to compensate for the loss of their heavy weapon. Buch ordered his men to fix bayonets. The German assault had penetrated to within 50 yards of the defensive line. Individual paratroopers were clearly visible through the thinning smoke. Some carried stick grenades. Others prepared to rush the foxholes with submachine guns. The battle had transitioned from long-range precision fire to close-quarters combat. Every American soldier understood what happened when German assault troops reached defensive positions. Private First Class Robert Lambert fired his last clip at 10:38. He reached for his ammunition bandolier and found it empty. Around the defensive perimeter, other soldiers reported similar situations. The platoon had expended approximately 1,200 rounds of rifle ammunition during 4 hours of sustained combat. Less than 200 rounds remained distributed across 18 men. Some soldiers had 5 rounds left. Others had 15. None had enough ammunition to sustain defensive fire for more than 3 minutes. The forward artillery observers made one final attempt to reach American artillery support. Technical Sergeant Peter Gackey transmitted coordinates for fire missions against the German assembly areas and the MG-42 positions, suppressing the American line. The 371st Field Artillery Battalion acknowledged the transmission, but could not allocate guns to support Lanzarote Ridge. Every available artillery piece was engaged, supporting regiment-sized units facing German armor and infantry assaults across the entire Ardennes front. At 10:45 on December 16th, the 4th German assault reached maximum intensity. 400 paratroopers pressed against defensive positions held by 18 Americans armed with less than 200 rifle rounds and no heavy weapons. The M2 sat silent on its jeep mount. The barrel had discolored from heat stress. Buch knew his platoon could resist for perhaps 10 more minutes before ammunition ran out completely. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had suffered over 90 casualties attacking this single ridge position. But the German commanders understood the mathematics. The Americans had to run out of ammunition eventually, and when they did, 500 paratroopers would overrun 18 riflemen in minutes. Behind the German assault force, the 1st SS Panzer Division waited for the infantry to clear the road junction so their tanks could advance toward the Meuse River. Everything depended on the next 10 minutes at Lanzarote Ridge. The German paratroopers breached the American defensive perimeter at 10:53. A squad of 12 Fallschirmjäger penetrated between two foxholes on the eastern flank, where ammunition had run out first. The soldiers in those positions had fired their last rounds 2 minutes earlier. They engaged the Germans with hand grenades and entrenching tools. One American soldier used his rifle as a club. Close quarters fighting in a defensive position against trained assault infantry rarely ended well for the defenders. Buch redirected 3 riflemen from the center of the line to contain the breach. These men still had ammunition. They fired at point-blank range into the German squad that had penetrated the perimeter. 7 paratroopers fell. The remaining 5 withdrew back toward the wire. But the breach had demonstrated a critical vulnerability. Once the Americans ran out of ammunition, the Germans would overrun the position in minutes, regardless of courage or tactical skill. At 11:09, Buch made a decision that violated every principle of reconnaissance unit doctrine. Instead of attempting to withdraw or conserve his remaining ammunition for a final stand, he ordered his men to maintain maximum rate of fire. The tactic seemed counterintuitive. Expending ammunition faster would shorten the time until complete depletion. But Buch understood the psychological dimension of the engagement. As long as his platoon maintained heavy fire, the Germans would believe significant defensive capacity remained. The riflemen fired as rapidly as they could acquire targets. M1 Garand rifles operated on a semi-automatic gas system that cycled automatically after each shot. A trained soldier could fire 40 accurate rounds per minute if he had sufficient ammunition and targets. For the next 8 minutes, Buch's remaining 14 men with ammunition delivered sustained precision fire against the German assault. The paratroopers interpreted the increased fire rate as evidence of fresh ammunition supplies or reinforcements. The 4th German assault wave withdrew at 11:21. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had committed its entire battalion to 4 separate attacks over 4 hours. Casualties now totaled 92 men killed, wounded, or missing. Officers reported to their division commander that the American position at Lanzarote Ridge appeared to be held by a reinforced company with heavy weapon support. German intelligence had failed to identify the true size of the defending force. The Wehrmacht believed it was attacking a well-supplied defensive position rather than 18 men nearly out of ammunition. Buch conducted an ammunition count at 11:30. The results were catastrophic. His entire platoon possessed 73 rounds of rifle ammunition. Some men had none. Others had 5 or 6 rounds. The M2 remained silent, with empty ammunition boxes scattered around the jeep. The forward artillery observers had exhausted their rifle ammunition as well. 22 Americans held the most critical road junction in the northern sector of the Battle of the Bulge with 73 rifle rounds. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow continued falling across the ridge. Buch's men had been in combat positions since 05:30 without food or water. Several soldiers showed symptoms of cold injury. Private First Class Risto Milosevic reported numbness in his feet. Technical Sergeant William Slape had minor shrapnel wounds from German mortar fire, but no American had been killed. One forward artillery observer, Technician 5th grade Billy Queen, had taken a bullet through his shoulder but remained at his position. At 11:45, Buch observed German officers gathering at the tree line with what appeared to be reinforcements. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment was being augmented with additional troops from Division Reserve. Through his binoculars, he counted approximately 200 fresh paratroopers moving into assault positions. The Germans were preparing a fifth attack with rested troops against defenders who had 73 rounds of ammunition remaining. Buch radioed regimental headquarters and reported his situation. The response came back within 1 minute. The 3rd Battalion could not reach Lanzarote. German forces had cut all roads into the sector. Artillery support remained unavailable. The order stood unchanged. Hold position. Do not withdraw. Buch acknowledged the transmission and returned to his foxhole. The reality was stark. His platoon had delayed the German offensive for over 6 hours. They had inflicted nearly 100 casualties on an elite airborne unit. But the mathematics of ammunition consumption versus attacking force size could not be overcome indefinitely. When the 5th German assault came, probably within the next 30 minutes, 18 Americans with 73 rifle rounds would face 400 fresh paratroopers. The outcome was no longer in doubt. At 12:15 on December 16, 1944, Lyle Buch watched German assault troops form up for their 5th attack on Lanzarote Ridge. His men had fought longer and harder than anyone had expected, but physics and mathematics were about to determine the battle's conclusion. The question was no longer whether the Germans would take the position. The question was, how many more hours Buch's platoon could delay the 1st SS Panzer Division's advance toward the Meuse River. The 5th German assault began at 12:37. Approximately 400 paratroopers advanced in a modified formation that emphasized rapid movement over spacing. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had committed its reserve companies to this attack. Fresh troops, who had not participated in the previous 4 assaults, moved across the snow-covered field with the confidence of soldiers who believed they faced a depleted enemy. German intelligence continued to overestimate American strength on the ridge. Buch distributed the remaining 73 rounds of ammunition across his platoon. Soldiers with marksmanship qualifications received priority. Men without ammunition were instructed to collect rifles and bandoliers from casualties if the opportunity presented itself. The defensive plan had simplified to its most basic form. Shoot until ammunition runs out, then fight with bayonets and grenades. There were no other options available. The American riflemen held fire until the Germans reached 60 yards. At that range, every round had to count. The first volley dropped 11 paratroopers. The Germans immediately went to ground and began returning fire with rifles and MG-42 machine guns. But without the suppressive fire of the M2, the Americans could not prevent the German advance from gaining ground incrementally. Squad by squad, the paratroopers moved forward through the snow using fire and maneuver tactics. At 12:51, 3 German soldiers reached a foxhole on the western flank where the occupants had expended their ammunition. The Americans fought with entrenching tools and fists. 1 paratrooper fell with a fractured skull. The other 2 withdrew after sustaining knife wounds. But the incident demonstrated how close the battle had come to hand-to-hand combat across the entire defensive line. The Germans were now within grenade range of multiple positions. Buch counted his remaining rounds. 16. Around the perimeter, his men were down to similar levels. Some soldiers had already fixed bayonets in preparation for the final phase of combat. The forward artillery observers continued calling for fire support, even though no artillery would arrive. Technical Sergeant Peter Gackey transmitted targeting data every 5 minutes, as if repetition might somehow produce results. It did not. The German assault gained momentum at 1300. Paratroopers had breached the wire barrier at 4 separate points. Small groups of 3 to 5 men moved toward the American foxholes using smoke grenades for concealment. The defenders fired their remaining ammunition at these assault teams. Each round killed or wounded a German soldier, but the mathematics remained inexorable. 73 rounds divided by 400 attackers meant the vast majority of Germans would reach the American line unharmed. At 13:14, Private First Class William James fired the last round from his M1 Garand. The distinctive ping of the ejecting clip signaled an empty rifle. He reached for his bayonet and prepared for close combat. Around the defensive perimeter, other soldiers were reaching the same point. The Battle of Lanzarote Ridge had entered its final minutes as an ammunition-based defense. What happened next would depend on hand grenades and edged weapons. Buch fired his final rounds at 13:17. 18 rifle bullets remained distributed among 22 Americans. The M2 sat silent on its jeep mount. The forward artillery observers had no ammunition left for their carbines. For the first time in 6 hours of continuous combat, the American defensive fire slackened to scattered single shots. German officers recognized the change immediately and ordered their assault teams forward. At 13:20, approximately 50 German paratroopers rushed the American foxholes simultaneously from 3 directions. The defenders threw grenades and fired their last rifle rounds. Several Germans fell, but the assault wave closed to within 20 yards of the defensive line. Buch could see individual faces, young men in their 20s, professional soldiers executing assault doctrine against a position they had been ordered to take 6 hours earlier. The Americans prepared for the final stand. Bayonets fixed, grenades armed, entrenching tools ready. Every man understood the next 2 minutes would determine whether they lived or died. The Wehrmacht did not have a reputation for taking prisoners from units that inflicted heavy casualties. 92 German paratroopers had been killed or wounded attacking this ridge. The survivors would not be inclined toward mercy. At 13:23 on December 16th, the Battle of Lanzarote Ridge reached its climax. 50 German assault troops closed on 18 American defenders who had no ammunition remaining. The 6-hour fight that had delayed the entire northern wing of the Battle of the Bulge was about to end in close-quarters combat on a frozen hillside in Belgium. The German paratroopers overran the first American foxhole at 13:26. 3 Fallschirmjäger jumped into the position where 2 soldiers had expended all ammunition. Hand-to-hand combat lasted 8 seconds. 1 German fell with a bayonet wound through the chest. The 2 Americans sustained knife injuries but continued fighting. A German officer pulled one of them from the foxhole at gunpoint. The Wehrmacht had finally breached the defensive perimeter after 6 hours of sustained assault. Additional German troops poured through the breach. Buch ordered his men to cease fire and surrender. Continuing resistance without ammunition would result in the deaths of soldiers who had already accomplished far more than anyone expected. At 13:32, 18 Americans from the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon and 4 forward artillery observers raised their hands. The Battle of Lanzarote Ridge had ended after 7 hours and 57 minutes of continuous combat. The German casualties were immediately visible across the snow-covered battlefield. 92 bodies lay between the tree line and the American foxholes. Some had died at the barbed wire fence. Others had fallen during the assault waves. The 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment had lost 16% of its combat strength attacking a position defended by 22 men. Battalion commanders reported to division headquarters that they had overcome a reinforced American company with heavy weapons support. Technical Sergeant William Slape had sustained shrapnel wounds during the battle, but could walk. 14 other members of Buch's platoon had been wounded by rifle fire, grenade fragments, or mortar shrapnel. Only 1 American had been killed. Technician 5th grade Billy Queen from the Forward Artillery Observer Team had died manning a machine gun position during the 4th German assault. The casualty ratio stood at 92 Germans killed or wounded versus 1 American killed and 14 wounded. The German soldiers who captured the American position expressed surprise at the small size of the defending force. A Fallschirmjäger sergeant examined the silent M2 on the Jeep and asked Buch how many machine guns his unit possessed. When Buch indicated the single 50 caliber weapon, the sergeant refused to believe him. German doctrine held that sustained heavy machine gun fire required multiple weapons with overlapping fields of fire and ammunition resupply. The concept that one machine gun, operated by exhausted soldiers, could produce such defensive effects contradicted their training. At 1400, the German battalion commander arrived at the captured position. He ordered his medical personnel to treat American and German wounded without discrimination. the Fallschirmjäger established aid stations in homes within Lanzarote village. Buch and his men received medical attention for their wounds before being prepared for transport to prisoner-of-war facilities. The German officer who accepted Buch's surrender acknowledged that the American defense had been conducted with professional skill. The tactical impact of the 7-hour battle became apparent over the following hours. The 1st SS Panzer Division's lead element, Kampfgruppe Piper, had been scheduled to pass through Lanzarote at 0800. The armored column consisted of 4,800 men, 600 vehicles, and over 100 tanks. Their objective was to reach the Meuse River by nightfall on December 16th. But the infantry regiment assigned to clear the route had been stopped at Lanzarote Ridge by 18 American soldiers. Kampfgruppe Piper did not arrive at Lanzarote until midnight on December 17th, 16 hours behind schedule. The delay cascaded through the entire German offensive plan. The northern wing of the Battle of the Bulge, which Hitler had designated as the main effort, lost critical momentum during the first day. Instead of advancing 60 miles toward Antwerp as planned, the 1st SS Panzer Division managed less than 10 miles before encountering reinforced American positions. The German commanders at the ridge had paused their advance after capturing Buch's platoon. They believed the woods behind the American position contained additional forces and armor. The heavy casualties sustained during 7 hours of fighting suggested significant defensive depth. German reconnaissance patrols moved cautiously through the forest, expecting to encounter tanks and reinforcements. They found empty woods, but the delay proved decisive. At 16:30 on December 16, 1944, Lyle Buch and his wounded platoon began their march into German captivity. They had held Lanzarote Ridge for over 11 hours against 500 attacking paratroopers. They had inflicted 92 casualties while suffering 1 killed and 14 wounded, and they had delayed the main German armored thrust by 16 hours. But none of them knew that yet. As prisoners of war, they believed they had failed. The true significance of their stand at Lanzarote Ridge would not become clear for decades. The German soldiers loaded Buch and his wounded platoon into boxcars at Junkerath 2 days after the battle. 72 American prisoners of war were jammed into a single cattle car designed for 40 men. The train traveled east into Germany without food or water. Temperatures inside the boxcar dropped below freezing. By Christmas Day, 7 men in Buch's car had died from wounds, exposure, or dehydration. The survivors were transported to prisoner-of-war camps at Nuremberg, Hammelburg, and Moosburg. Buch spent 5 months in German captivity. The conditions deteriorated as the Wehrmacht collapsed during early 1945. Food rations decreased to thin soup once per day. Allied bombing raids targeted rail lines and supply depots near the prison camps. German guards became increasingly hostile as their nation faced defeat. Many prisoners developed hepatitis, dysentery, or pneumonia. When American forces liberated the camps in April 1945, Buch weighed 112 pounds. He had weighed 165 pounds on December 16th. The soldiers from the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon returned to the United States believing they had failed at Lanzarote. Buch considered the wounding of 14 men and the capture of his entire unit a complete tactical failure. He did not know that his platoon had delayed the 1st SS Panzer Division by 16 hours. He did not know that the northern wing of the Battle of the Bulge had fallen critically behind schedule because of the stand at Lanzarote Ridge. He simply knew he had been captured after his ammunition ran out. The platoon dispersed after the war. Soldiers returned to civilian life across America. Nobody discussed Lanzarote Ridge. The battle had been overshadowed by larger engagements during the Battle of the Bulge. Bastogne received international attention. The Malmedy massacre generated war crimes trials. But an 18-man reconnaissance platoon that held a ridge for 7 hours disappeared into the historical record without recognition. In 1965, the United States Army published a multi-volume history titled The Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Author Hugh Cole mentioned Buch's platoon in passing with minimal detail. Private First Class William James, who had fought at Lanzarote, read the brief reference and became upset at the lack of recognition. He contacted Buch and encouraged his former lieutenant to seek proper acknowledgement for the platoon's actions. Buch wrote letters to his former division commander, Major General Walter Lauer, requesting that his men receive decorations for their defense of Lanzarote Ridge. In June 1966, a silver star arrived in Buch's mailbox, but no other member of the platoon was recognized. Buch refused to accept an individual medal when his entire unit had fought together. He began a 15-year campaign to ensure every soldier received appropriate recognition. The process required congressional hearings, letter-writing campaigns, and interviews with military historians. John Eisenhower documented the battle in detail for his book, The Bitter Woods. Columnist Jack Anderson wrote about the forgotten platoon in national publications. Slowly, the historical significance of Lanzarote Ridge became apparent. 18 men with one Jeep-mounted machine gun had stopped 500 attacking paratroopers for 7 hours and delayed an entire SS Panzer Division during the critical first day of Germany's last major offensive. On October 26, 1981, the United States Army formally recognized the Intelligence and Reconnaissance Platoon's actions at Lanzarote Ridge. Every member of the unit received decorations. 4 soldiers, including Buch, were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. 5 received Silver Stars. 10 received Bronze Stars with V device for valor. The entire platoon received the Presidential Unit Citation. The decorations made Buch's platoon the most decorated American unit of its size for a single action in World War II. 37 years had passed between the battle and the recognition. Some soldiers from the platoon had died without knowing their sacrifice had been acknowledged. William James, who had initiated the campaign for recognition, died in 1977 after 37 surgeries to repair wounds sustained at Lanzarote. But the surviving members finally understood they had not failed. They had accomplished something extraordinary. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about soldiers who held impossible positions with improvised defenses. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Lieutenant Buch and his 18 soldiers don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.